Hello again. Hi. This is a video about authenticity, and I suppose it applies to a lot of things, certainly in magic, but I'm talking about specifically Druidism or Druidry, as it's often referred to. Some people would distinguish between the two as sort of one being sort of hereditary or indigenous, and the other being sort of international. But in almost all cases, it's all what you call neo-druidry or neo-druidism, and that it's based on a revival. There are a very, very small number of people who actually have any real claim to an indigenous tradition in the Druid path. And the reasons for this are that it was a religion or sort of priesthood. It was wiped out. It was wiped out a long, long time ago. And you have residual pieces of it. Particularly, you'll find that in Ireland and in Wales, maybe to a small extent in Scotland. But throughout most of Western Europe, it was already gone as you entered the early Middle Ages. Which is very unfortunate. So for most people that leaves only one option, which is to follow a sort of revival or reconstructionist path, which sort of began with the sort of romantic Druidry of the 1700s. It's kind of ironic really, because the last gasp of Druidism really was in Ireland with this sort of the Celtic order, if you want to call it that. It's a difficult word, Celtic. There's a lot of argument about what that means and if it means anything at all. But you could call it the Gaelic order, more accurately, I suppose. The indigenous form of life and government of the Gaels in Ireland, which disintegrated completely after the defeat of Hugh O'Neill, and by the reign of James I, who followed after Elizabeth I, everything was in chaos, and most people who had any influence or power, I suppose the elites, if you like, the upper echelons of Irish society, all cleared off. It's called the Flight of the Earls, 1607. It's the time period we're talking about. And that left all sort of the Druidic class, the bards. I suppose they'd be called bards, they didn't call themselves Druids at that point. And they would be nominally Christian as well. They had no patronage, they had no one to support them. So you get the vestiges of that famous harpist O'Carolan, and O'Sullivan, the poet as well. You have sort of a few kind of poverty-stricken leftovers from this era who carried on the traditions and sort of the hedge schools, but it was pretty much destroyed as a result of the failure to defeat the English sort of recolonisation, if you like, or rather the completion of the colonisation process, which was never completed at the time it began, and in fact went into reverse for hundreds of years. That process was finally over at the beginning of the 1600s, and that really was the demise of what anything you could really call Druidic in Ireland in a real sense. There might be very few people, a very, very small number of individuals and triads that carried on into the 20th century. By the end of the 20th century, in the beginning of this century, none of these people are left, unfortunately. And you have a small number of people in Wales or from Wales who have an authentic tradition. Again, very, very small in number. So the majority of people are basing their Druidry or Druidism on the Druid revival. And very much of that is of a very romantic nature. So based in Freemasonry to a large extent, and has actually not that much to do with actual authentic Druid law and Druid practice. Of course, Freemasonry is an offshoot of Hermeticism, sort of the Neoplatonic Roman, Greek, Egyptian part of magic. And that very much revolves around the four elements and the idea of spirit in the centre. And that's completely different from the Irish and Welsh original tradition. So to be authentic really as a Druid, you've got sort of two choices. You can accept that you're a neo-druid and what you're doing is based on Hermeticism. Of course, the Greeks were in Masala, in Gaul. So you could say possibly there is some credence for using the four directions with the four elements instead of Gaulish Druidism because of that influence. And of an early date, about 1250 BCE, I think you had some Egyptian influence in Ireland as well. But so you can argue that for overlaying the four elements on the original threefold system, which is what you'll find in Wales and in Ireland, and that is the original authentic indigenous Druidism, or Druidry, if you like to call it that. And you don't have four elements, you have 9 in that system. To many people who may have some knowledge of Druidism, to hear that there's 9 elements is a total shock to them. They know nothing about it. They know nothing about the threefold system apart from you've got 3 realms. That is commonly known within the sort of neo-druidic movement, the realms of sky, land, and of sea. So that'd be the pretty much, for most people, the extent of their knowledge of this. There is a huge body of work around this subject and a whole sort of cosmology that is unique. But the thing is, it's not widely known, and most modern Druids, modern writers on Druidism pay very little attention to this and just mention it in passing generally. But if you're prepared to do the work, there is a huge amount of information and practice to be discovered. I think really you need to decide, are you going to be what you call sort of a full neo-druid or romantic revival druid and follow that path, which is very much geared towards the international Druidry and could be practiced anywhere. It's not specific to any particular country. Or are you going to go down the road of a specific path, such as Irish Druidry, Welsh Druidry, or Druidism maybe being the better term, perhaps, in terms of trying to follow an indigenous or archaic form. But then there's a whole problem there with the use of the word indigenous. How do you get to call yourself indigenous if you're trying to revive a path that's been gone for arguably, you could say in Ireland was gone by 800 AD, so you're talking about 1200 years ago that the last actual real Druids existed. Some people would say they were gone even earlier than that. So you're talking about reviving a tradition which would have been all in Old Irish, and very few people know modern Irish in Ireland compared to the bulk of the population. it's only a sort of 2 or 3% that are actually fluent in Irish, and you're able to use it properly on a daily basis in the same way that I'm speaking English to you. And very few people who understand Irish actually understand any Old Irish or even Middle Irish. So you cannot really recreate these things exactly as they were. What you can do is try and do an approximation based on the information that's extant from mostly books and some of the folklore that has been passed down. But we're kind of limited in our ability to recreate the Druidism of the past. But you could certainly make a fair go of it if you're prepared to put a lot of time and effort into studying the Irish Druidic part. There is sufficient information out there if you're prepared to dig and put the time in to actually have a workable model, which is quite different from the sort of international neo-druidic hermetic part. Ultimately, the goals are pretty much the same of both routes, really, in being close to nature, working with nature, using nature magic. But the approach can be quite different. Again, in Wales, it's different again from in Ireland. From my understanding, the Welsh don't actually have a sort of deity as such, whereas in Ireland you have a whole bunch of deities which may have been worshipped by the common people and by the Druidic class. We don't really know. There's no definitive book that says, hey, this is what the Druids believed, this is what they did, this is the list of their gods that they worshipped. In Ireland it's complicated in that you've got many different layers of gods. You've got different time periods. They're sort of stacked one on top of the other, right? From about 7 or 8 so different invasion periods we have gone back. So it's very difficult to place gods and goddesses at a particular time, and there was some kind of mixing up of pantheons. We're not really sure whether they belong in one group or another. So what I would say is that in order to be authentic, you have to really kind of make some kind of a choice. And even if you want to call yourself indigenous or an Irish Druid or a Welsh Druid, you have to bear in mind this isn't always transferable. For instance, your culture may be so different from those two countries that it might be very difficult for you to have an appreciation of it. In the same way that if I was, say, for instance, wanted to become a devotee of Shinto, I don't know very much about Japan. I'm very interested in Japan, and I'd love to go visit it. And I've read some Japanese literature, etc. Watched a lot of Japanese films, but to be honest, I'm not Japanese. I'm not ever going to be Japanese, and I don't really know if I can actually fit into that religious path. If I was to go, people spend their whole lives involved in Shinto, and much that might be desirable, you can't always have exactly what you want. So you could say to some extent, if you don't have a connection with Wales or with Ireland in some way, if you don't live in the country, if you never lived there, if you don't have a family from there, it makes it a lot more difficult to connect with that particular part. I'm not saying it's impossible or you shouldn't try to do so, but to have an authentic connection, it requires a lot more study for somebody who has never visited the country and doesn't have a sort of hereditary connection in some way with Ireland or Wales, for example. And there's that whole issue of appropriation. People who maybe think they know about something, they may have good intentions, and there's people who write books about Ireland, about Druidry here, who've never ever been to this country, and they're trying to tell the public, "Oh, this is how it is," and quite often they make some very, very bad, serious mistakes, sometimes very laughable mistakes. I mean, everyone's capable of mistakes. In my own writing, I've made mistakes. Everybody does from time to time. But the point is, if you're going to write or teach, you need to know your subject matter. I don't know anything about templin bowling. I'm not going to write a book on templin bowling because I know nothing. I know nothing about it. I don't even know the rules properly. So, for me to attempt to teach other people about that would just be ridiculous. But there seems to be sort of a complete lack of shame with some people that, despite having spent a couple of weeks doing some course, they think they can go and write books about esoterica and magic for the public to consume. And I think you have to take a certain amount of pride in your work. You have to put the work in, and the knowledge has to be accumulated. You need to sort of perhaps put aside your ego to some extent to become a good teacher. And you can't just suddenly start teach people after 5 minutes of doing something. It's just like, someone who'd done grade 1 on the violin suddenly becoming a teacher. In order to teach the violin, you have to, there's 8 musical grades, and then you probably might do some kind of degree or equivalent of a degree. Join an orchestra, whatever, do a course in composition, etc. At that point, then, you're probably qualified to teach people violin. You don't do grade 1 and then go off and start a violin school or become a violin teacher. Unfortunately, with the magical world, a lot of people seem to want to take shortcuts. So they're very happy to sort of start selling their wares after minimal experience and study, which is absolutely appalling and shocking to me. This was not a trend sort of in the 80s or 90s or prior to that. I think very much because of the internet, people now, they just think they can just set up some, sort of virtual carpet bagging operation. Because it's easy to do. You just need a nice website. You need to smile a lot and, dress it in a way that seems to be sort of impressive. And you probably pick up a load of followers. There's a lot of naive people out there. But, these people aren't authentic. And if you want to learn, obviously you want to learn from somebody who is authentic, who knows what they're talking about, who knows traditions, who knows the practices, that has actually studied it properly and really knows what they're on about. So I think for people who are starting out, you really need to be very careful and very choosy about where you go. And again, with the books that you read, you need to be very choosy about that, because there's an enormous amount of bad books out there. And there's a large amount of patent publishers, some of them who actually are very, very careless about the content that they put out. If they think it'll sell, they'll just put it out. It doesn't matter if it's good or not in some cases. And you really have to watch out for these trash books that are supposedly informing and teaching, but a lot of the information they contain is completely wrong, or in some cases utterly useless and a waste of your time and energy. So as a general rule, I would say anything published in the previous century, certainly before the 90s, is more likely to be is it decent than books published today? That's not to say there aren't good books today. There are lots of very good books published in the last 20 odd years. But you have to be careful. You really have to. You really have to be careful about what you take to be true. On face value, books might look quite good, but if you do a little bit of research, you might find that they're not so accurate. If you look in the bibliography of the book, often you'll find that all of the books that the author has referenced are all from the last 30 years, and they don't have anything from, the early 1900s, the 1800s, 1700s, 1600s, whatever, any of the medieval literature, etc. And I'd be extremely suspicious of that, because what they're doing is just regurgitating the work of other people. They haven't gone back to the source material and studied it themselves. That's quite clear. When they've, all their reference material is only 30 odd years old. So be very careful in that. In order to be authentic as a person, generally, it requires effort, and to be authentic in Druidism or magic also requires effort and commitment and a lot of time. Just like learning to play the violin, the example I mentioned earlier. If you want to be a really great violinist, you're going to have to put a lot of time in practicing. You're going to have to buy a lot of sheet music. You'll have to have lessons. You'll have to practice pieces over and over and over again, even though it might be boring as hell. You're just going to have to do it if you want to be really good at the violin. And the same applies with magic and Druidism. You've got to be selective about what you choose to study, and then you actually have to do the hard work of actually studying, getting down, and immersing yourself in it in the practical way as well. Because it's not just about books and study; it's about experience gained through nature, through working in the natural environment and with nature. The two go hand in hand. You really need both. You don't really get one without the other. There is a sort of academic side to Druidism, but very much so there is a practical, nature-focused side that is absolutely essential. Just reading isn't going to be enough. For instance, if you never saw a sunrise in real life, but you saw 1,000 photographs of sunrises, you'd never really understand what it was to stand and watch the sun come up in the morning. It wouldn't matter how many photos you looked at or how many people described it to you. To really understand what a sunrise is like and what it is, you need to get up early and go and watch the sun come up, and then you'll know. I'm trying to think of this proverb. It's a Chinese proverb. I think it is: to see is to know, to do is to understand. I think I remembered that correctly. And that's very, very accurate. Actually doing things yourself is a lot more powerful than just sort of reading about it or studying. And that's why good teachers will generally make you do practical things. They won't just give you a load of stuff to read. They'll demand that you actually immerse yourself practically in what you're learning about. And sometimes a good teacher will tell you stuff that you don't want to hear as well. They might reprimand you, or they say you should do something differently. These days, people are so concerned with making money and having fans and followers that they're almost terrified to tell people what they want to hear. But, to teach someone well, to teach someone properly, what's necessary and what's nice aren't always the same thing. Sometimes it's necessary to tell people stuff that they're not going to like. And then later on, they may realize the benefit of what you've said, even if at the time you may have upset them But I mean, to be a good teacher, you have to risk upsetting your pupils sometimes, telling them things that they don't like for their own benefit, in order for them to grow as a student, to fully understand the subject matter. Sometimes you have to do that. And this modern trend, of trying to placate everyone, all this shiny, happy images, and sort of very marketing-led sort of esoterica, unfortunately leads to some more lightweight, sort of happy-clappy version of education within the magical arts. And I think if you want to do a good job, you forget about that. It's more important that you have an authentic teacher, you have an authentic path, that what you're learning is actually worth your time and your effort. So really, basically what I'm saying is it's quite a minefield out there. You have to be very careful. And always be prepared to sort of revise things, to change, to make changes. I mean, in my own part, I've made many changes over time. My understanding of Druidism has changed enormously over the last 30 years. When I began, I knew very little about it. And even today, I'm still learning. I don't know everything. And no person could ever hope to know everything. And I would say once you've decided that you're an expert, that you're, an official, some kind of sort of paragon of virtue, a guru of your craft, then you won't learn anything else anymore. You need to try and retain some kind of humility in order to continue to learn, to grow, and to improve. And I suppose that's what we're all here to do. We're all here to try and learn and hopefully to do some good in this world. And for me, Druidism is a path through which I try to do that. And my intention is to try and pass on what I know to other people who have a genuine interest in what I have to say and what I could teach them. Of course, there's no point trying to teach people who aren't interested. And saying if you're not really interested in studying something, then what's the point in trying to follow that? Trying to find a teacher or pursue it if you don't have a love for it. So, my final words really is just be very careful. Try and use your discernment and judgment about who you learn with and what you learn and what you're going to put a lot of time into. And always be prepared to make changes if necessary, if you feel things aren't going in the way that you would like them to go, or you feel like a particular tangent you've gone on is not beneficial, then be prepared to change direction. But always look into things for yourself. No matter how good you think your teacher is, never put them on a pedestal. Never take everything as gospel. Question. Check things out for yourself. And if you think, your teacher's wrong, then tell them so. I mean, a good teacher will be willing to discuss and debate things with you. And people should be able to disagree even without falling out. No matter what, retain critical thinking, retain your independent thought, and be prepared to make decisions for your own self. Anyway, that's all I have to say. Quite a long one today, and I hope you found it interesting. If you did, please hit the like button, and if you haven't subscribed already, I'd be grateful if you subscribed as well. I'm trying to get my numbers up over the 500 mark, which is taking quite some time, but I'll get there eventually, hopefully. Thank you very much for watching. That's all for now. Bye-bye.